Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So I had an idea of a sort of interesting video that I think will be really fun to talk through. So I know I and a lot of other people in the bookish community have cover buying tendencies. And to me, what that means is either you pick up a book or you see a book, you love the cover, and then you buy it just based off of that. Or you walk into a bookstore, you see a book with an interesting cover, you read the back, sounds interesting, and you pick it up regardless of if you've ever heard of it before. So obviously the former is a little bit more obviously a cover buy. It's just about the cover. But honestly, I usually end up reading the back of a book. I wouldn't pick up a book based on the cover and not think about what it's about at all. That's a little too extreme, but I still think it's sort of a cover buy, because if you don't have any research or knowledge about the book beforehand and you just walk into a bookstore and you're like, this is a cool cover, let me make sure it sounds somewhat interesting before I purchase it, that's still a cover buy to me. So what I want to talk about is the reality of cover buying. Is it worth it? Does it provide you with better books that you actually enjoy? Or is it just a excuse and reason to just keep buying books that we see out that are very pretty and will look aesthetically pleasing on our shelf? We're gonna find out today. So I have a couple of books that I have bought because of their covers, that I have picked up, read the back, bought mostly because of the cover, and then read. And I want to talk about the realities of that. Did I enjoy those books? Did I hate those books? Is it worth it? So all of that being said, let's get into the video. All right, we're gonna start off with a book called Mothers by Chris Power. I saw this book in January of 2019, I think. I went to the Strand in New York City and I saw this out and about and I was like, that's a really cool cover. And even though it looked so interesting, just the cover alone was fascinating to me, I didn't buy it at the time. And then I saw it again later on at a local bookstore closer to where I live. And I picked it up and I was like, this is a book that I've been looking at and thinking about the cover for so long. And then I read the back and I was like, it's a short story collection. There's not a lot of information because it's just short stories. That happens a lot. I will say that short story collections, you really have to be drawn in by the cover, because a lot of the time there isn't a lot of information about the actual contents of the stories, because giving a synopsis of every story would be too much and it would also give so much away. So with these short story collections, you kind of have to like the cover or know about the author or have some kind of context. Otherwise, you really don't know what you're getting yourself into. So in this case, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I just picked this up and I was like, great cover, sounds interesting. I like short stories. Let's give it a try. I read this in March, I believe, of this year, and I absolutely loved it. This is a short story that talks a lot about travel and what travel means to different people and family and friendship dynamics in the context of travel. So I didn't really know what to expect going into it. So it was really interesting to kind of go through and find those central themes, because it doesn't really give you a exact theme. It talks about journey, navigating a journey, like words like that, like little phrases like that are on the back, but it doesn't really give you an exact understanding of what the common threads of the stories are going to be. That's a very long-winded way of saying I was really pleasantly surprised by what I got in this book. And this book was actually the start of me going through and star rating the short stories in a collection. You can see here. And now I do that all the time. And that really helps me to come up with an overall rating for the book. And it gives me a nice perspective of what stories I liked and what stories I didn't like, so that if I reread this book, I'll have a good idea of that and I can go back and see if my perspectives line up or if I have different favorites, etc. So to me, this one was definitely worth the cover purchase. I think part of the appeal of this cover is not only like the art on the cover, but the feeling and size of the book. This is a very small book. It's a very floppy book. It just feels nice to flip through. As you can see, I'm kind of like constantly touching it. Like, it's just such an appealing book to hold and to read. So honestly, besides just looking at the art on a cover, I definitely do take into account how the book feels and the size of the book and all of those things to kind of decide whether I want to purchase it. So this was a 5-star read, and it was definitely worth the cover buy. I really, really liked this one. Next up, we have The Harpy by Megan Hunter. I picked this one up pretty much solely because of this cover. It is one of the most gorgeous, interesting covers I have ever seen. So this book is about a couple, and the husband has an affair, and the wife has an agreement with the husband that she can hurt him 3 times and then they can call it even, basically. That's the premise. So it sounded really interesting. It sounded very much along the thread of that like domestic thriller kind of situation, which I think is hit or miss in a lot of ways. Sometimes they're really interesting and sometimes they're just too cliche. I really liked this book up until the very end. And I think I might have a different perspective now after having read so many really weird books, but the end was really weird and very different than the trajectory of the rest of the book. So I'd have to reread it and see if it made more sense on second read or if I liked it better on second read. But I gave this 4 stars because I really, really enjoyed what it was doing throughout most of the book. But the end was just a little bit too fantasy-esque or just a little bit too wild for my taste. I prefer something that's more psychological and less like fantasy realm. So the ending was a little much, but I do think that the cover does fit the book pretty well overall, and I definitely got what I expected to get out of this book. I'm still glad that I picked it up, and the cover definitely was the major reason why I picked it up. I'm not sure if I would have if it wasn't for this cover, but now I have this beautiful cover on my shelf, and I do actually want to reread this and just see if I get even more out of it on second read. So overall, I think this one was worth it. All right, another book that I had never heard of that I picked up at a local bookstore was The Dark Dark by Samantha Hunt. So I don't actually have my copy of this one anymore, and if that's an indication of how I felt about it, there you go. This is a short story collection, and to be honest, I read it in March, I think, and I really don't remember much about it. I remember loving this cover so much when I saw it out in the world, and it also had a very similar like small book, really nice feel kind of situation, and I picked it up. I was like, I have to get this. It's a short story collection. It looks weird and dark and twisted. It was just not a good book. I don't even have any particular reasons for it. I just did not like most of the short stories. I think I did star rate a lot of the short stories, and there were just not many that I gave above like a 3-star. And I ended up getting rid of it because it didn't make any significant impact on me. I don't even remember what the stories were about. I just remember they were really weird and really not good in my opinion. So no shade if you like this book, but for me, it was a cover buy that I knew nothing about before I got it, and I probably should have done some more research. All right, moving on, let's talk about a book that I do own, but I don't have with me right now, and it is The Need by Helen Phillips. So this one was, again, a cover buy. I walked into a local bookshop, I saw the cover of this book, and I was like, wow, that looks really cool. And then I read the description, and it was a book about motherhood in kind of a more abstract way. It is sort of a science fiction-y-esque motherhood tale about a mother who works at this kind of archaeological site, and she ends up coming across basically a duplicate of her, and she has to fight with this other woman who basically is her from another dimension. She has to fight with her over who is going to keep her children. It's a really strange book. It's really unsettling. I don't know that it lived up to the expectations of the cover, to be honest, because the cover is so beautiful. I liked the idea of the book, but I didn't like the writing style. That was my biggest complaint. I don't have any particular identifying factors. I just thought that it was like a little bit clunky, a little bit awkward. I didn't like the writing of the book. And I think if this book had been written in a slightly different way, maybe I would have liked it more. I think I ended up rating this one 4 stars on Goodreads, but really it was more like a 3 or a 3.5 stars. I'd have to change it on Goodreads. But as I've thought about it over time, I like it less, which is not a good sign. When I finished the book, I was like, that's a 4 star, I liked it. And then as I think about it, I'm like, there's a lot of things I didn't like about it. So I'm not sure if I'm going to hold on to that book long term or not. I think it served a purpose. It was interesting in the moment to read about, but it just wasn't a book that I feel like is a long-lasting favorite or something that is really going to stick with me. So, sort of worth it? All right, moving along to a little bit of a more positive review, we have Hysteria by Jessica Gross. So this was 100% a cover buy. I was looking at a shelf of books in a bookstore that I was visiting, and I saw the spine of this book, and I was like, that's interesting. I have to look at that. So then I pulled it off the shelf. I saw this cover, and I was like, if this isn't coming home with me, there's going to be a problem. Like, this is everything. I love this cover. It's an upside down face. It's painted. It's so interesting. I love this cover so much. And then I read the inside flap and I was like, this is the weirdest book. Like this sounds like the absolute weirdest book that I've ever read. It has to come home with me. How can I not take it home with me? And oh my God, I'm so glad that I did. I'm sure y'all know how much I love this book. I talk about it constantly on all of my social media. So this book follows a young woman who has a sex addiction, and she goes into a bar one day and she thinks she sees Sigmund Freud. And it's about what happens after that point, her interactions with this Freudian character, all of the reasons why she is the way she is, and how all of the past experiences have amalgamated into her current situation. It's really just a deep dive into her psychology, and it's through this kind of Freudian lens, which to me is fascinating. It is such a weird book. It is a total fever dream. I read it in a very short period of time, and I was kind of laying in bed on, I think, a December day, and I just finished it very quickly and was like, what just happened? And I think a reread would even further improve the experience of reading this book. So this one was 100% worth it. This was a 5-star read when I read it. I think it'll be even better the second time. And yeah, this was a very positive experience of a cover buy. All right, moving along, I have another book that I purchased at the same bookstore on the same day as Hysteria. Which, what a day, oh my gosh. But it is Die My Love by Ariana Horowitz, which I have talked about many times since I read it in April, I believe. And I love this freaking book so much. What a day to go to a bookstore and find 2 books that are going to become all-time favorites that are both just random cover buys. Like that, I really hit the lottery of bookstore days that day, my goodness. But this book basically follows a woman who is dealing with potentially postpartum depression. She really is unable to mother her child at this point, and her husband is really not helping the situation. So it really just is about her lack of identity being a mother and not being able to figure out where her place is and what she's supposed to be and do going forward after having a child. She's really lost a sense of herself. This book ended up leading to a whole host of other motherhood related books, and they were all inspired by my experience with this book because I had such a positive experience reading about motherhood in this context that I had to know more about it. So I read so many other books in that same kind of genre, and I wonder if it was intentional for the cover to be yellow because it does kind of harken back to The Yellow Wallpaper, which is a classic short story by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, which is one of my favorite short stories of all time. But this is kind of in that tradition. And then all of the books I read after this one this year all kind of fall into that same tradition. So it was a really great start to a new interest of mine and a new reading passion of mine, and ultimately led to the first article that I wrote for Books and Bow, which was about books on motherhood. So this was the beginning of all of that, and I gave this 5 stars upon my first read. This was also one of the first translated books that I read in the beginning of my translated literature kind of phase. It's not really a phase, but it sparked the interest in translated literature. This is from Spanish, and the author is from Argentina. So, like I said, this sparked a really, really huge interest in translated literature for me. And this book also sparked my interest in and my love for Charco Press, which is the small press that translates and publishes works from Spanish, and they're based out of the UK, and they are incredible. And now I have a little collection of a bunch of Charco Press publications that some of them I've read, some of them I haven't read yet, but I stan Charco Press. So this one was the beginning of all of those interests and passions, and obviously fantastic book, and definitely worth the cover buy. Next up, I have a book that I don't have physically because a friend is borrowing it, and that is the short story collection Animal Wife by Laura Ehrlich. I love the cover of this book. It immediately drew me in, and it was such a strange and visually intriguing cover that I had to pick it up. Some of these stories were really, really good. Some of them were like 5-star stories, but the problem was that the majority of them were just kind of meh. I don't even have many particulars to tell you because it was kind of unmemorable and it was kind of just meh. So this one ended up getting a 3-star for me because it was just too in between with everything. I didn't have strong opinions on any of the stories really. Like I said, there were a few that were higher rated and there were a few that were lower rated, but most of them were just kind of meh. So yeah, the cover was way, way, way too gorgeous in my opinion for the contents of this book. It was just a little disappointing to get a cover that I love so much and then the book to just kind of fall flat. So this one wasn't really worth the cover buy. And then finally, I have one more cover buy book, and it is Little Eyes by Samantha Schweblin. So this actually ended up being a cover buy because I knew about Samantha Schweblin's other work and wasn't really sure if I would like it. And then I walked into a bookstore and I saw this one, which I had never heard of before. And the cover is super interesting. There's like little green eyeballs all over. They look like they're kind of made out of crayon markings, which is really interesting. This is sort of a dystopian sci-fi-esque story that's kind of based in reality, honestly, about these little robots that become household robots. And there's 2 people involved in the usage of the robots. There is the keeper who has the robot in their home, and there is the dweller who actually sees through these robots' eyes. The robots are called Kentuckys, and it basically just follows all of these different pairings, these randomized pairings around the world between keeper and dweller through the Kentuckys. And it basically talks about the invasion of other people's privacy and how we have allowed media and AI and social networks and all of these things to invade our privacy. It's fascinating. It is definitely social commentary, but it is done in such a unique and interesting way. This wasn't a 5-star favorite all-time. This wasn't like a 5-star all-time favorite book situation, but it was a 4-star because I really, really enjoyed reading it, and I also really liked thinking about it critically after the fact and thinking about all of the social commentary that it holds and all of the things that we can think about going forward because of this book. So I think it was definitely worth the cover buy. I didn't know anything about this book, even though I knew about the author, and it was a really, really great place to start with this author, I think. I'm interested in reading more from this author now, so I think this one was definitely worth it. And I also got to do a book discussion with one of my friends, so that definitely made it worth it as well. All right, that is all for today. Please let me know if you bought any books based on their covers and if they were worth it. I would love to know. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.